You know, a few days ago, we celebrated the 49th anniversary of man's first landing on the moon, which was way back in July 20th, 1969. I was fortunate to be around during that time and to be able to witness all of that development leading up to it and then what happened after it. And as a result of that, I've had a fascination with that kind of science all of my life. And as a photographer, I actually really do enjoy photographing the night sky, but one of the areas that I probably don't do enough of is to actually photograph our very own moon, that same place where those brave men actually went and landed on it all those years ago. And photographing the moon is not as hard as you might think it might be. It's actually quite easy to do. So we're going to spend a little time on our next adventure photography series video. So come and join me beyond the campfire as we learn how to photograph our closest neighbor, the moon. Photographing the moon is actually a quite easy thing to do. It's very bright, of course, and so the exposure values are very reasonable. You don't have any long exposures or anything like that. And there's really only two pieces of equipment that you need to have. One is a tripod, a fairly sturdy tripod. The other one, of course, is your camera and some kind of telephoto lens. Now your lens can vary quite a bit. The longer the lens, the more detail you're going to be able to pick up. But you can photograph the moon using even a relatively small telephoto lens. Something in the neighborhood of 200 millimeters to say 250 millimeters up to 300 works just fine, and that's going to bring the moon in close enough and you're going to see quite a bit of detail. And with a little bit of creative cropping, you're going to be able to get some really nice photographs of the moon. What I use typically is this lens here. It's a 50 to 500 millimeter lens, and I will zoom it all the way out. Now to actually capture the moon, there's some things that you need to think about first before you actually do this. First of all, capturing the moon requires that you put your camera in two different modes. One is called spot focus, and the other one is spot metering. And they're not the same thing. Your spot focus allows you to focus on one specific point within the viewfinder. And when shooting the moon, it's generally going to be the very center point that you're going to want to use. Now, spot metering is very similar to that in that you can select a particular point within the frame in which to meter off of your subject. And in this case, you're going to want to use that center point, the center spot, the same spot that you're going to be focusing on. And the reason you want to do that is because the moon is relatively small against a very dark background. And if you're using, say, a matrix metering or a evaluative metering where it's looking across the whole spectrum of the view itself, that dark background is going to throw your exposure values off, and it's going to cause your moon to be overexposed, and that's not going to work very well. So use spot metering and spot focus, and that's going to bring you into a lineup that you're going to be able to get the moon in good sharp focus and get a good exposure value set against it. Okay, now I will also typically use aperture priority when I am shooting the moon. And the main reason for that is I like to control my depth of field. Even shooting the moon, you need to have a fairly wide depth of field on it. So I usually shoot somewhere around an f8, something in that nature, and I will use an ISO I'll start out at 100. I will occasionally bump it up to say 200 or so. You can go as high as 400 if you want to, but it's not really necessary because the moon is very, very bright. As far as your white balance setting goes, now the moon, the light coming off of the moon is basically just reflected sunlight, so it's daylight. And so you want to set your white balance on either a daylight setting or just set it on auto white balance, and it's going to give you a good color capture, good color rendition of what's actually the surface of the moon looks like. I also will use just an on-off remote release, a cable release. And the reason I do that is that when you have your lens extended all the way out, like so, and you got it even on a relatively sturdy tripod, if you start hitting that button, I don't know if you can see it on the film there or not, but that camera's going to move, that camera's going to jiggle. And even if you're using a relatively fast shutter speed, say 1/200th or 1/250th of a second or something like that, when you're magnifying it out that far, just that little bit of jiggle like that is going to blur your image. So a cable release will prevent that from happening. And what I normally do is I'll use live view, and I'll put the center focus point dead center on the moon, and I will hit the push the button down about halfway and let it focus. And then I'll pause for about 2 seconds to let any dampening, any movement, any vibration to dampen out, and then I'll go ahead and fire the image at that point, because just the act of that lens focusing at that millimeter range, or at that telephoto extension like that, is going to cause that camera to vibrate a little bit. So you want to pause just briefly between getting the focus and actually capturing the image. Okay, so I've actually had people ask me, when is the best time to photograph the moon? Of course, the moon is, if you have any awareness about it at all, goes through a series of phases. It can be as very thin crescent all the way up to, of course, a full moon. And that extends out over a range of about 30 days or so. Most people mistakenly believe the best time to photograph the moon is when it's a full moon. Now, you certainly can do that, and there are actual benefits from shooting a full moon. You can get some really nice effects with that. But in reality, though, the best time to shoot the moon is when it is in one of the phases other than a full moon. Somewhere between 1/4 of the full moon all the way up to maybe 3/4 of the full moon. Somewhere, anywhere in those ranges there. And you're going to be able to see a lot more detail on the moon. You're going to see longer shadows, which causes the craters and the mountain ranges and things like that that's on there to actually show up a whole lot better. So shooting a full moon, though, is fine. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But the best time to shoot a full moon is right when it first comes up. And that's going to be right after the sun goes down. So when that moon first gets above the horizon, the first, say, 10 degrees or so above the horizon, right in that range there is the best time to shoot it, because it's going to have a real reddish, orangish glow to it, because the light coming off the moon is going to be traveling through the thickest part of the atmosphere, and that causes the light to be shifted over to a reddish kind of a look to it. And you can get some really nice effects. You can put some things in the foreground. You can do all different kinds of things like that with it. So, best time to shoot it when it's high in the sky is somewhere when there's one of the moon phases. Shooting a full moon, the best time to shoot it is when it first comes up of an evening. You know, for those of us who were around back in 1969 and were able to witness that amazing adventure that when we first put man on the moon, it's been a memory that has been ingrained in our lives ever since. and it's something that I still, even today, 49 years later, I'm fascinated with, and I love studying about it. I love looking at videos and reliving those moments from that era. One simple way that you can do that in a different kind of way is to take a few moments on a nice clear dark night and photograph the moon. This is something you can do out in your own backyard. You don't have to be away from the city to do that. It's something that's quite easy to do. I hope you have enjoyed our adventure this evening or today, and spend a little time. Take some time. Step away from that campfire for a while and go out and explore the night sky, explore the moon, take a few pictures along the way, and come and join us beyond the campfire for our next segment. We'll see you then.